The four of them had been standing at the entrance for almost 3 minutes before anyone came. Not a long time by most measures, long enough to feel it. Nadia pressed her shoulder bag tighter against her side and watched the restaurant move around them like they were not there. Servers crossed the floor. A host walked past with 2 menus tucked under his arm, made brief eye contact with her grandmother, and kept walking. A woman near the window laughed at something her companion said. A baby in a high chair slapped the tray with both hands. The whole room was alive and loud and completely uninterested in the 4 people standing near the door still wearing their coats. Her grandmother, Vera, had not moved. She stood with her hands folded in front of her, her gray coat buttoned all the way to the collar despite the warm air inside. She was 68 years old and had the posture of a woman who had spent a lifetime refusing to let anyone see her discomfort. She was not looking around the restaurant. She was looking at a fixed point, just above the host stand, the way a person looks when they are being patient and want no one to know how much effort that is costing them. Nadia's uncle Dmitri leaned toward her. "Should we just sit somewhere?" he said in Russian, his voice low. "We need someone to seat us," Nadia said. "There are empty tables." "That's not how it works here." Dmitri made a sound in his throat that expressed, without any words, everything he thought about how it worked here. He was 51, broad-shouldered, and had the expression of a man who had been mildly inconvenienced for about 40 minutes longer than he was willing to tolerate. He had not wanted to come to this particular restaurant. He had pointed at a place 2 streets over, with photographs in the window and prices visible from the sidewalk. Nadia's mother, Polina, had overruled him because she had seen this restaurant mentioned somewhere and decided it was what she wanted. Polina was currently the only one of the 4 of them who did not look frustrated. She was looking at the menu board above the counter with genuine interest, tilting her head slightly, reading each item as though it were a puzzle she was enjoying. "Mom," Nadia said. Polina turned. "There is something called a loaded burger. What makes it loaded?" "Can we focus?" "I am focused. I'm reading the menu." The host finally appeared. He was young, maybe 20, with a short-sleeved collared shirt and a practiced smile that arrived about half a second before the rest of his face caught up with it. "Hi there. Welcome," he said, in English. "Table for 4? "Yes," Nadia said, in English. She was the only one of them who spoke it well enough to carry a conversation. He led them to a booth near the back of the room, set 4 menus on the table, told them their server would be with them shortly, and disappeared. They settled in. Vera sat with her back straight, her hands flat on the table. She did not pick up the menu immediately. She looked around the restaurant with the careful, quiet attention of someone cataloging a new environment, noting the exits and the layout and the way the light fell, the way she always did in new places, old habits. She had grown up in a time and a place where knowing the room had been a useful skill. Dmitri opened his menu and squinted at it. "What is a flatbread melt?" "It's like a sandwich," Nadia said, "on flatbread." "And it melts?" "The cheese melts. The cheese melts. The bread doesn't melt." He considered this. "Why don't they just call it a cheese sandwich?" "Because then nobody would order it." He made the throat sound again. Polina was reading her menu with the same focused pleasure she had used on the board. She had turned it sideways and was examining the photographs with concentration. "This one looks good," she said, holding it up for Nadia. "That's the dessert section, Mom." "I know, it still looks good." Vera set her menu down. She had been reading it, but her expression was flat and careful in the way it got when something was wrong and she was deciding whether to say so. She looked at Nadia. "Ask them," she said in Russian, "what the soup is today. The chicken one. There might not be a chicken soup. I don't see one on the menu." "There is always a chicken soup." Nadia did not argue this point. Her grandmother had lived through enough to have developed strong opinions about the consistency of chicken soup across human civilization, and those opinions were not worth challenging in a restaurant booth. The server arrived. His name tag said Colin. He was perhaps 24, with the unhurried friendliness of someone who had been doing this long enough to be comfortable, but not long enough to be bored. "Hey, how are we doing today?" he said, in English, his eyes moving around the table with a smile. Nadia smiled back. "Good, thank you. We have a few questions." The moment she started talking, she felt her grandmother lean slightly toward her, angling to hear. Polina looked up from her menu. Dmitri set his down. Colin answered the questions Nadia translated for him. "No, there was no chicken soup on the menu today." "Yes. The flatbread could be made without onions." "Yes. The drinks came with free refills. He was patient and friendly, and clearly doing his best. And Nadia translated everything back in Russian, going back and forth between the two languages. And it was fine. It was manageable. But it was slow and slightly awkward in the way these things always were, the way she always felt slightly in the middle of everyone, the translator who is never quite in one conversation or the other. Colin left to give them time. They talked among themselves. Vera asked about the soup twice more. Polina decided on the loaded burger, and then immediately reconsidered. Dmitri settled on something within the first 30 seconds, and then spent the remaining time looking around the restaurant with mild suspicion, as though it might do something unexpected. When Colin came back, Nadia ordered for all of them. She knew their orders well enough. She had been doing this for years, everywhere they went when she traveled with them. The pharmacy, the train station, the car rental counter. She was 26 years old and had been the family's English voice since she was 16, when she had first started learning properly, and she was used to it, but that did not mean she did not sometimes feel the slight weight of it. The way it meant she was never quite fully present in any moment, because part of her was always listening for the next thing she would need to explain. Colin took the menus and left. The food would take about 15 minutes, he said. Nadia translated this. Vera nodded. They sat. The restaurant hummed around them. The baby near the window had been given a soft toy, and was now holding it with both hands and looking at it with great seriousness, as though it contained information. Two men in work jackets at the counter were having a loud and happy argument about something. A group of teenage girls in a corner booth were laughing at someone's phone. Nadia's grandmother looked at her hands. It was a small thing. She just looked at her hands, which were resting on the table, and her face was still and quiet, and Nadia almost missed it, because she was looking at her own menu again. But she caught it. The way Vera's eyes went down and stayed there. The way her shoulders, which were always perfectly straight, dropped by almost nothing, barely a centimeter, barely visible unless you had been watching her your whole life. Nadia looked away. She picked up her water glass and held it for a moment without drinking. Outside the window beside their table, the street was busy. People walked past with purpose. A man walked a small dog that was trying very hard to investigate every crack in the pavement. A woman on a bicycle rolled by slowly, one hand on the handlebar and one holding a coffee cup, which seemed reckless but graceful. A bus slowed and stopped and released a small crowd of people who immediately dispersed in different directions. The world outside moved. The restaurant around them moved. And the four of them sat in their booth and waited, which was all they could do, which was something they were all, in their various ways, very practiced at. Dmitri said something quiet to Polina. She laughed. Vera looked up briefly at the sound, her face softening for a moment, and then she looked back at her hands. Nadia did not say anything. She watched her grandmother and held her water glass and thought about chicken soup, and about the 10-hour flight they had taken yesterday, and about how her grandmother had not complained once during any of it. Not the long lines, and not the cold airport, and not the hotel bed that was too soft. Not once. And she thought about how that was either a very strong person or a very private kind of tired, and she had never been completely sure which one it was, or whether it was both. The restaurant kept moving around them. The baby near the window dropped the toy and looked at where it had gone with absolute astonishment, as though gravity had only just been discovered. Nobody from the staff came to the table. Nobody glanced over to check. 15 minutes passed, then a little more. Vera's hands stayed on the table, flat, still, patient in the way a stone is patient. And somewhere on the other side of the restaurant, a young woman in a black apron was moving between tables with a coffee carafe, refilling cups, her head slightly down, her steps efficient and quiet, and she had heard everything, all of it, every word, from the moment they had walked in. She had said nothing, not yet. They had been sitting for 23 minutes before the first plate arrived, and it was wrong. Not terribly wrong. Not the kind of wrong that causes a scene. It was the quiet kind of wrong that arrives at a table and sits there, and makes everyone look at it, and then look at each other, and then look at it again, while they decide how much it matters. Polina's loaded burger had come without the cheese. It was just a burger on bread, which was technically a burger on bread, which was what Polina had ordered, except that the menu photograph had shown cheese, and Polina had specifically said yes to the cheese when Colin had asked about toppings, and Nadia had translated this, and she was reasonably certain she had translated it correctly. Colin was not at the table. He was taking an order at a booth near the door. Dimitri's plate had not arrived at all. Vera's soup had arrived, which was good, except it was not chicken soup. It was a tomato bisque, which was a dark reddish color, and smelled good, and was clearly made with some care, but it was not what Vera had ordered, or rather, it was not what Nadia had ordered for her, which was the beef stew that appeared on the menu under the heading Hearty Options, and which had looked, from the photograph, like the closest thing to what her grandmother actually wanted to eat. Vera looked at the soup. She looked at it with the expression of a woman who has seen many things in her life that were not what she expected, and has learned not to make a great deal of that fact. "This is not the stew," she said. "I know," Nadia said. "It's soup." "I can see that. It smells good. Do you want to try it?" Vera looked at the soup for another moment. Then she picked up the spoon. She took one careful sip, the way she tasted anything new, slowly and without expression, giving it a fair assessment. She set the spoon down. "It is good soup," she said, "but it is not what I asked for." Nadia raised her hand to get Colin's attention. He was still at the other table. He glanced over and gave a quick nod that meant he had seen her and would come as soon as he could, which was the standard signal in any language. Polina had taken a bite of her burger. She had not said anything about the cheese. She was chewing thoughtfully, looking at the burger with the same focused attention she gave everything. "It's good," she said, in Russian. "The bread is good." "There's no cheese," Nadia said. "I know, but the bread is good. I'm going to tell them." "You don't have to." "I want to." Polina shrugged gently. She took another bite. Dimitri's food arrived while Nadia was still waiting for Colin. A different server brought it. A young woman with short hair and a harried expression. The kind of expression that means someone's section is very busy, and they are managing it with controlled urgency. She set the plate down, confirmed Dimitri's name in the sense that she said, "Flatbread melt?" And he nodded even though he did not speak English, and she was gone before Nadia could say anything. Dimitri looked at the flatbread melt. It had onions on it. He had specifically not wanted onions. He had made this clear through Nadia, who had made this clear to Colin, who had written it down. The onions were there regardless. He did not say anything. He picked up his fork and began systematically moving the onions to the side of the plate, transferring them one by one to the edge with the careful focus of a man who has decided that making a complaint is more trouble than solving the problem himself. When Colin finally appeared at the table, Nadia explained the issues. The missing cheese. The wrong dish for her grandmother. She was polite about it. She was always polite about these things. She had learned, over years of being the person between two languages, that a translator takes on the tone of the conversation, and if she was polite, then the exchange was polite, and if she was not, then it became something harder for everyone. Colin was apologetic. Genuinely, it seemed. He wrote things down on his pad again. He said he would get the cheese brought out right away, and that the stew would take a few more minutes. He said he was sorry for the mix-up. He said it twice. He was a decent person trying to do a decent job, and something had gone wrong in the kitchen or in the communication between the front and the back, the way things sometimes do. He left. He did not offer anything to compensate for the wait or the errors. It was possible this did not occur to him. It was possible there was nothing to offer. Nadia did not ask. Vera had finished the tomato soup while they waited. She had eaten all of it, carefully, without comment. She set the spoon in the bowl. She looked at the table. Then she folded her hands again. Nadia noticed. She always noticed when her grandmother folded her hands. It was the gesture of waiting, and it was different from the gesture of resting, though from the outside they might have looked the same. The difference was in the fingers. When Vera rested, her hands were loose. When she was waiting, the fingers were slightly interlaced, holding their own grip, a private anchoring. The restaurant was loud around them. There was a table nearby that had just received a large order, and there were many plates coming out, and the people at that table were happy, and talking loudly, and reaching across each other for things. The energy there was warm and celebratory, the kind of energy that belonged to a long meal with people you liked, and Nadia felt the contrast between that table and their own table, without naming it to herself. Just felt it the way you feel a temperature difference when you move between rooms. The cheese arrived. It was 2 slices, brought out separately on a small plate, not melted on the burger, just cold cheese next to a burger that had been sitting long enough to cool. Polina looked at it. She looked at Nadia. Nadia looked at the cheese. Neither of them said anything. Polina picked up a slice and laid it on the burger herself. "It's fine," Polina said, in Russian, meaning it. The stew arrived about 12 minutes later. A different plate, a different server, A quick swap of the empty soup bowl. Vera looked at it. It was clearly the right thing this time. There was the photograph from the menu made real. Dark broth, large pieces of vegetable, chunks of beef. She reached for her spoon. "Good?" Nadia asked. Vera took a careful first bite. "Yes," she said. Nadia felt a small release of something she hadn't realized she had been holding. She picked up her own fork. Her sandwich had been sitting for a while and the bread had softened slightly, which was not how she liked it, but she was hungry, and she ate it without saying anything. Dmitri had finished moving his onions and was eating steadily. He had not complained once. Whatever he was feeling about the onions, he kept to himself. This was a quality in him that Nadia had always appreciated without ever telling him so. They ate. The table was quiet. Not uncomfortable, just quiet. This was how they often were, the four of them, this particular combination. They were not a family that filled silence for its own sake. They let the silence be there when it was there. Nadia looked up once and caught her grandmother looking across the restaurant, not at anything specific, just across it, the way a person looks when their eyes are moving to stay awake, or to give the mind somewhere to go. Vera looked back at her plate. "Are you tired?" Nadia said. "I'm fine," Vera said, which was what she always said. "We can go soon. We're eating. After we're done, I mean. We can go back. We don't have to do anything else today." Vera looked at her. Her expression was not unkind. It was simply closed in the way that meant she did not need the thing that was being offered. "I wanted to come," she said. "I'm glad I came." "Okay," Nadia said. "I'm not tired." "Okay." They ate. The restaurant was still moving around them, still loud and full and indifferent. At the table across the room, the birthday group was singing now, a loud and cheerful and slightly chaotic version of a birthday song, and several other tables were joining in because that is what people do, the way the warmth of a thing like that is contagious. Vera listened to it. Her face was still but not closed anymore. She was listening in the way she listened to music sometimes, not tracking the melody, just receiving it. There was something in her expression that was not quite a smile but was in the direction of one. Nadia watched her for a moment. Then she looked back at her plate. She was still eating when she heard the voice. She did not hear it clearly the first time. It was behind her, and the restaurant was loud, and she had not been listening for Russian because she had not expected it. But something in the shape of the words reached her, the way sound reaches you in a half attention, when your brain catches a pattern before you consciously decide to listen. She turned. There was a young woman standing at the edge of their table. She was wearing a black apron over a plain shirt. She had dark hair pulled back and a notepad in her hand that she was holding but not writing in. She was looking at Vera. She had just said something, quietly, in Russian. Nadia had caught the end of it. She had caught enough. She had said, "You look like you need something that was actually right." Or something close to that. The exact words were gentler than that, more private, the kind of thing you say to someone when you are trying not to make a fuss of it. Vera was looking at the young woman. Her expression had changed completely. The young woman said something else. Nadia understood all of it this time. Her Russian was clear and easy, with an accent that was familiar, in a way that Nadia could not immediately place. An Eastern accent, something regional, something that her grandmother would recognize more precisely than she could. "She asked," Vera said slowly, looking at the young woman, "where we are from." The young woman nodded. She was waiting. She was not smiling the way servers smile at customers. She was looking at Vera, the way one person looks at another when they want to know the answer. Vera told her, "The city, the district within the city, the way you tell someone who will understand what those words mean, not just as geography, but as everything that geography carries with it." The young woman's face changed. Nadia set down her fork. Something was happening at the table that she did not yet understand but that she could feel, the way you feel the pressure of weather changing before the weather itself arrives. And then the young woman said the thing that no one at the table had expected. She said it in Russian, directly to Vera, quietly enough that the tables around them would not hear, and she said it without preamble or apology, the way you say something when you have been wanting to say it for a while and have finally decided that the right moment has arrived. Nadia heard it. Her mother heard it. Dmitri stopped eating. Even he understood it, and Dmitri was not a man easily surprised. For a moment, no one at the table said anything. Then Vera said something back, very quietly. The young woman nodded. She pulled out a chair from the empty table behind her and sat down at the edge of their table, not as a server now, not formally, just as a person who has just heard something that changed the nature of the conversation. She set her notepad on the table. She did not take out a pen. Nadia looked at her name tag. It said Elena. She had been working this restaurant for what looked like years from the ease of her movement through it. She had been here, in this building, in this country, speaking English all day and keeping her Russian somewhere else, somewhere quiet, the way some things are kept. And she had heard them. She had been hearing them all evening, and she had waited, and she had watched, and now she was sitting at the edge of their table with her notepad in her hands and something open in her face that had not been there before. Vera was looking at her with an expression that Nadia had not seen on her grandmother's face in a very long time. It was not joy exactly, it was something older than joy, something that joy is made from. Recognition. Elena had not planned to sit down. She had been planning to finish her section, run the coffee refills to table 11, check on the couple near the window who had been waiting on their dessert for longer than they should have, and then clock out at 7:15 and take the bus home the way she did every shift. That had been the plan. It was a plain and organized plan. She was a person who made plain and organized plans because the alternative, she had learned, was chaos, and she had had enough chaos in her life to last. But she had been listening to the table in the back booth since the moment they walked in. It was not something she decided to do. It happened the way breathing happens. She heard the Russian at the entrance and something in her simply oriented toward it, the way your eyes move toward motion in your peripheral vision. Automatic, below the level of choice. She knew they were struggling from the second Colin took their table. She had watched him walk away looking slightly helpless after the first attempt at communication. She had watched the woman who spoke English, the young one, the granddaughter, it was obvious, taking on the weight of the table, translating and retranslating, arranging and rearranging everyone's needs into a language that would land. She had watched the grandmother fold her hands. Elena knew that gesture. She had a grandmother. She had watched her grandmother make that exact gesture in exactly those circumstances, and she knew what it meant. And it was not a language thing. It was not about Russian or English or any particular arrangement of words. It was about the specific kind of quiet that settles on a person when they have decided not to ask for what they need, because the asking would be more trouble than it is worth, and they have been through enough trouble to know the difference. She had felt the pull toward the table for almost the entire first half of their meal. She had walked past it 4 times. She had refilled the water once, making brief eye contact with the granddaughter, who had thanked her in English. She had not said anything beyond that. She had told herself it was not her table. Colin's section, Colin's table. This was true and also slightly dishonest, because the reason she had not gone over was not professionalism. It was something harder to name. Something about exposure, about the way speaking Russian in this restaurant to these strangers would make her visible in a way she was not usually visible here, would say something about her that she controlled very carefully. Not from shame, there was no shame in it, but from the particular privacy that comes from having a life in 2 languages, and keeping them in separate rooms. She had come to this city at 16. Her family had left, as many families left, for reasons that were clear and complicated in equal measure. She had learned English the hard way, in school, in the street, in the first 2 terrible years of not understanding what anyone was saying, and having to build comprehension out of context and guesswork and exhausted repetition. She had become good at it eventually. She had become, people told her, indistinguishable. She was not sure how she felt about that. She had never entirely decided. She was 24 now. She had been working at the restaurant for 3 years. She liked the work more than she had expected to. She liked the rhythm of it, the physical clarity of it, the way a good shift had a shape you could feel when you were in it, the pace and the timing, and the particular satisfaction of a table that had what they needed and was happy. She was good at reading tables. She knew when someone wanted attention and when they wanted to be left alone, when a complaint was really a complaint, and when it was something else wearing the costume of a complaint. She had read this table from the beginning. She had read the grandmother from the beginning. The tomato soup going to that table had been a kitchen mix-up, the kind that happened on busy nights, and she had seen it come out, and she had seen the expression on the old woman's face, just for a second, the flash of something before it was put away, and she had felt it like a small shock, the way you feel something that you recognize from the inside of your own experience. Elena had grown up watching her own grandmother navigate unfamiliar systems with enormous dignity and very little assistance. She had watched her grandmother stand in offices and at counters and in waiting rooms where nobody spoke her language and she could not ask for what she needed, and she had watched her grandmother remain straight-backed and patient and absolutely alone in those moments, in a way that Elena could not describe without something contracting in her chest. She had told herself, those times, that she would always be the person who helped, that she would never be the person who walked past. She had walked past this table 4 times. The 5th time, she was carrying the coffee carafe back to the station. She was perhaps 2 feet from the table. She was not looking at it. She was calculating whether she had time to check on the dessert situation before her next table needed water. And then Vera put down the fork. It was a small motion. Anyone could have missed it. Elena did not miss it. She stopped. She stood there for a moment with the coffee carafe in her hand, and she looked at the table, and she made a decision, and then she changed direction, and went to the table and set the carafe down on the table behind it, and looked at the grandmother directly, and said, in Russian, quietly enough that it was only for the table, "Tell me what you actually want to eat, and I'll make sure it gets there right." Except that was not quite what she said. The Russian she used was more specific than that, more embedded in the texture of how things are actually spoken, and it landed differently than a translation can carry. It landed in the grandmother's face like a door opening. The grandmother looked at her. Then the grandmother said where they were from. Elena heard the city. She heard the district. She heard the specific neighborhood within the district, and the name of it was the name of the neighborhood her own grandmother had grown up in, the same square kilometers of streets and buildings and specific light, the same parks and the same types of apartment buildings, and the same name for the bus route that ran along the main road. She said simply, "My grandmother is from there." The words came out of her before she had quite decided to say them, but once they were out, she did not regret them. The old woman across the table looked at her for a long time. The granddaughter had turned around. The mother had set down her fork. Even the uncle, who had the posture and expression of a man who was mainly present in body, had stopped eating and was looking at her with something new in his face. Then the old woman said, gently, "What street?" Elena told her. Vera's face did something that Elena would later try to describe to her roommate, and not quite managed to, because it was not a single thing. It was the face of someone for whom a fact has just become real, that had been only true before. There is a difference between a thing being true and a thing being real. True is information. Real is when the information arrives somewhere inside you and changes the temperature of things. "I know that street," Vera said. "I know," Elena said. She pulled out the chair. She sat down. She did not know exactly what she was doing, only that it was the right thing, and that the plan she had made for the rest of the shift had become irrelevant, and that she would sort out the coffee refills and the dessert check and the rest of it afterward. And right now she was sitting at this table, and this was where she needed to be. Vera began to talk. Not about the meal, or the mix-ups, or the soup that had been the wrong soup. She talked about the street. She talked about it the way people talk about places they have not seen in a long time, with a care and a precision that is really a form of preservation, describing specific things in the present tense to keep them that way. The particular bakery on the corner that had been there since before Vera was born and was still there, as far as she knew. The building near the park with the blue tilework on the upper floor that everyone knew and nobody knew the history of. The direction the light came from in the afternoon in winter, the particular angle of it, the way it made the snow look almost orange sometimes. Elena listened. She had heard some of these things from her own grandmother's stories. Some she had not heard. Some she could not have heard, because they were specific to the years Vera had lived, the particular living of a life in that place. But she listened to all of it with her full attention, and she recognized it, and she received it, and this was a thing she was doing for Vera, but it was also something she was doing for herself, something she had not known she needed until the moment it arrived. The granddaughter, Nadia, was quiet through this part. Elena glanced at her once. Nadia was watching her grandmother with a still and focused attention, and her face was doing something careful, holding something carefully. Eventually the food situation was addressed. Elena took out her notepad. She asked, directly in Russian, what everyone actually wanted. She went down the table. Vera, who wanted the stew but with the vegetables on the side if possible because she preferred to add them herself. Polina, who wanted the burger and yes, the cheese. Melted, please. and also whether the restaurant had something with sweet potato, because she had seen it mentioned somewhere. Dmitri, who wanted the flatbread melt without onions, which Elena wrote down with a small underline to make sure it reached the kitchen that way. She took the notepad to the kitchen herself. She spoke to the cook directly. This was not technically within her role, but it was within her capability, and the cook, a quiet man named Patrick, who had worked there for 11 years and had the calm of someone who had stopped being surprised by front-of-house situations, simply nodded and said, "I'll handle it," and she believed him. When she came back to the table, the conversation had not stopped. Vera and Nadia were talking to each other now, and Dmitri was saying something to Polina, and the table had a different quality than it had had before, an aliveness, a presence, as though several people who had been operating on low energy had found something to power them back up. Elena came and went. She managed her other tables. She brought the food when it was ready, the right food this time, everything exactly as it had been specified. She brought extra bread because the stew was better with the bread, and she knew this from eating similar things her whole life. She brought a glass of water for Vera with ice, even though Vera had not asked for it, because it was warm in the restaurant near the back. Between visits, she thought about the street. She thought about the particular quality of her grandmother's voice when she talked about places. She thought about how you carry a place inside you, whether you want to or not, and what it means when someone else is carrying the same one. At one point, she was standing at the station writing something on her pad, and she realized her hands were slightly unsteady in the way they got sometimes, when something happened that she had not emotionally prepared for. Not badly, just slightly. She pressed her pen a little harder and wrote more deliberately, and it steadied. The restaurant was loud. The birthday table was still going. The couple near the window had finally received their dessert. Table 11 was on their third coffee refill. Everything was normal and none of it felt especially important. The booth at the back was quiet now, all four of them eating, and from a distance you would not have known that anything had happened there. You would have seen four people having dinner. You would have noticed nothing unusual. You would have been wrong about that. Vera ate the stew. She ate it with the care she gave to most things, steadily, without rushing. The vegetables had come on the side the way she had asked, and she added them herself in a specific order. The potatoes first, then the carrots, then the softer ones, which was the way she had always done it, the way her mother had taught her without teaching it explicitly, just by doing it that way in front of her, for the first 20 years of her life, until it became the only way Vera knew how. Habits like that go very deep. They are the last things to leave. Elena came back twice more with small things. A piece of bread she had not asked for, but that was exactly right. A refill of water. She did not stay long each time. She was working. But each time she came, she addressed Vera directly, speaking Russian at normal volume. Not quietly the way she had at the beginning, not performing a private thing, but simply doing a natural thing. And the strangeness of it in this place had already passed. Vera watched her when she left. She watched the way Elena moved through the restaurant, fast and sure, cutting the most efficient path between tables, anticipating where she needed to be before she was needed there. She recognized it. She had spent 30 years doing similar work, different work, but work that required that same quality of attention, the constant reading of conditions and adjustment of response. She recognized a skilled person in motion. She turned back to her stew. She added a carrot. "She is good," she said, not to anyone in particular. "She is," Nadia agreed. Polina said through a bite of burger. "The cheese is better now." Dmitri said nothing. He had finished his meal. He was sitting back in the booth with his arms folded across his chest, not in the way that means closed or angry, but in the way that means satisfied and at rest. He had eaten everything on the plate, including the onion-free flatbread that had arrived correctly and completely, and the eating had improved his mood in the way that food always improved Dmitri's mood, which was one of the things Nadia appreciated most about him. He was straightforward in that regard. Hungry, he was difficult. Fed, he was simple. "What did she say?" he asked. The thing she said, the first thing. Nadia looked at her mother. Polina was looking at her grandmother. Vera set down her spoon. She thought about how to put it for a moment, not because she did not remember, but because the exact words mattered and she wanted to get them right. "She said," Vera said slowly, "that I looked like her grandmother when someone brought her the wrong soup." Dmitri considered this. "Huh," he said. "It's a very specific thing to notice," Polina said. "Yes," Vera said. Nadia said nothing. She had heard it herself, the original words, and she had thought the same thing her mother just said. It was a very specific thing to notice. It required seeing someone closely enough to read not just their expression but the history behind it, the context that explained it, the particular flavor of a patience that has been practiced long enough to look like equanimity from the outside, but is actually something more effortful than that. Elena came back to clear the plates. She stacked them efficiently, asked if anyone wanted dessert. Polina said yes immediately. Nadia asked what the options were. Elena described them in Russian without looking at the menu. Polina chose the one with sweet potato, which existed in the form of a sweet potato tart that was one of the few things on the dessert menu that Elena actually recommended, and she said so, and Polina looked pleased. While Elena was clearing the dishes, Vera asked her something. Nadia caught most of it. She was asking how long she had been here. Elena paused in her clearing. She held a plate in each hand and she looked at Vera, and she did not give the number immediately, the way you sometimes pause before a number that carries weight. 8 years, she said. Vera looked at her. You came young, she said. 16, Elena said. Vera nodded. One slow nod. The kind that says, I understand. Not I understand the details, but I understand the shape of it, the weight of it, the way 8 years in a new country begun at 16, is a specific kind of life, a specific kind of construction of a self, where everything is built on the seam between two worlds and you are the only person who lives exactly on that seam. Is your grandmother still there? Vera asked. She passed away 2 years ago, Elena said. Vera said, very quietly, the Russian phrase for this. It is a phrase that has no clean English equivalent, a phrase that holds more than condolence, something closer to acknowledgement, the recognition that a grief is real and continues. Elena's hands tightened briefly on the plates she was holding. Just briefly. Thank you, she said. She went to take the plates away. She was at the kitchen door when she stopped and stood there for a moment with her back to the room. Then she pushed through. At the table, no one spoke for a moment. Polina was looking at the middle of the table. Nadia was looking at her grandmother. Dmitri was looking at his folded hands, which was unusual for him. Vera was looking at the kitchen door. The dessert came out. It was the sweet potato tart that Elena had recommended, and there was also a small plate of something else that nobody had ordered. A few small cookies that were clearly house-made and slightly warm, which Nadia understood was a gesture but did not say anything about, because saying something about it would have made it formal, and it was better as what it was. Polina ate the tart. She made a specific sound that meant it was exactly as good as she had hoped. Dmitri took one of the cookies and ate it in 2 bites and said nothing, which was his version of approval. Vera took a cookie and held it for a moment and then ate it slowly. Nadia did not eat a cookie yet. She was watching the room. She was watching Elena, who was on the other side of the restaurant now, talking to a couple who had just arrived, showing them to a table, handing them menus. She watched her translate herself effortlessly from the version that had been sitting at their table 15 minutes ago to the version that lived in this room, in this language, in this particular register of professional warmth. She watched it, and she thought about the seam. She had grown up on a seam herself, not the same seam, but something adjacent to it, the line between what her family was and where they lived, and what they spoke at home, and what they spoke everywhere else. She had never left one country for another, but she understood, in the way you understand things that you have not experienced directly but have watched closely for a long time, something of what 8 years on that particular seam felt like. Vera finished her cookie. She brushed the crumbs from her hands over the plate, with the habit of a woman who had been cleaning up after herself for 6 decades without thinking about it. I want to leave her something, Vera said. We can leave a good tip, Nadia said. Not just money, Vera said. Nadia looked at her. What do you want to leave? Vera thought about it. She looked at the table. She looked at her hands. She was quiet for long enough that Nadia almost said something. Then Vera reached into her bag. It was a large bag, dark gray canvas, the one she carried everywhere, which contained, as far as Nadia knew, approximately everything that might conceivably be needed at any moment, organized in a way that Vera understood completely, and no one else could decode. She reached in and found something. She put it on the table. It was a small photograph. It was not new. The edges were soft from handling. It was a street scene, a specific street, a winter photograph, the buildings on both sides of the frame, and a particular angle of light that was almost orange on the snow. Nadia looked at it. She knew what street it was. She looked at her grandmother. Vera was looking at the photograph with an expression that was not sad, exactly. It was the expression of someone looking at something they love and have accepted not having with them. "You're going to give her that?" Nadia said. "I have others," Vera said. She reached into her bag again and found a pen. She turned the photograph over. She wrote something on the back. Nadia could not see what it was from where she was sitting. Vera wrote it slowly, taking care with the letters. When Elena came to bring the check, Vera held out the photograph. Elena took it. She looked at the front first. She was still for a long time, looking at the street. Then she turned it over and read the back. She looked up at Vera. Vera looked at her. Elena's face was doing something that she was not entirely managing to keep controlled, and she was clearly aware of this, and not sure what to do about it, and she looked away for a moment at the middle distance the way people do when they are deciding. Then she looked back. "Thank you," she said, in Russian, simple words, held longer than simple words are usually held. Vera nodded. "You reminded me," she said, "that it is possible to be far from home and still find it." Elena stood there with the photograph in both hands. Around them the restaurant kept moving. Tables turned, plates arrived and were cleared. The couple near the window had finished their dessert and were putting on their coats. The birthday group had paid and was filtering toward the door in small batches, still laughing. Nobody in the restaurant was watching this table. Nobody could see what had passed between these two women, what had been given and received, what had been said, and what had been left unsaid, in the precise and important way that certain things are best left unsaid. Nobody was watching. It did not need to be watched to be real. Elena held the photograph for the rest of the shift. Not physically. She put it in the pocket of her apron when Vera placed it in her hands, folded it once, gently, along an existing crease, and put it in the left pocket where she kept her pen and her small folded list of things she needed to remember for each table. She could feel it against her fingers every time she reached into that pocket for the pen. It was light. Paper is always lighter than what it carries. The restaurant needed her. That was the fact of the next hour. 3 tables turned simultaneously, and 2 of them needed more attention than usual, and the kitchen was running slightly behind because of a busy burst mid-evening. She worked. She moved through the room with the automatic focus that good service requires, which is a particular kind of presence, a divided attention that is very complete in every single direction at once, and she did not think about the photograph consciously for most of that hour, because she could not afford to. But she could feel it. There is a thing that happens when you receive something you were not expecting, and it arrives in a form that is more exact than anything you could have asked for, a specific street, a specific angle of light. The back of the photograph, which she had read and which she had understood completely, which was not a long message, which did not need to be long. She refilled glasses. She brought a check. She answered a question about the menu. She took an order from a table of 2 who could not agree on whether to share a dessert, negotiating between them with patience and a gentle suggestion, and they ordered the dessert, and she was glad. She checked on the table near the back once more, but it was empty now. They had left. She had not seen them go. She had been at the far end of the room. When she came back, the booth was clear, the table wiped down by the busser, already reset for whoever came next. The menus were stacked. The salt and pepper were returned to their place. She stood at the edge of the section for a moment and looked at the booth. Then she went to finish her shift. At 7:40 she was in the back room with her coat in her hands when Colin came in. He was counting his tips from the night. He looked up when she came in. "Hey," he said, "how'd your section go?" "Good," she said. "That table in the back booth, the one with the language situation, was that your section or mine? I got confused midway through." "It was yours at the start," Elena said. "I stepped in." Colin nodded slowly. "There was miscommunication on a couple of the orders, I think. The kitchen mixed something up. I'm not sure what happened exactly." He was not defensive about it. He was the kind of person who took accountability, without making it about himself, which she had always liked about him. "It worked out," she said. "Did they leave a good tip?" She had not checked. She had not been the one to pick up the check. She almost said this, but then she remembered. She had been the one to bring the check to the table, and Nadia had paid it, and she had taken the check folder back to the register, and she had left the change in the folder on the table, because she always left change in the folder, and she had been at the other end of the room when they left. She went back out to the section. The check folder was still on the table. She opened it. The tip was generous. More than generous. Significantly more than the standard percentage. The kind of number that means the people who left it had talked it over and agreed on something. There was also a note. It was folded in half inside the folder. A piece of paper from the notepad she had left on the table in case anyone wanted to write something, the way some restaurants provide. There was writing on it. She picked it up and read it. She stood there in the empty restaurant with the folded note in her hand and the check folder in the other, and she read what was written. It was in Russian. Nadia's handwriting, she could tell, or perhaps Vera's. Both of them had written on it, she thought, the handwriting changing once partway through. It was not long. It did not need to be long. She read it twice. She folded it very carefully and put it in the same pocket as the photograph. She stood there for a moment in the quiet part of the restaurant, the part that was already being reset for tomorrow. Chairs wiped down, ketchup bottles refilled, the light already dimmer over the sections that had been closed. The restaurant had the particular quality of a room after it has been used well, a warmth left in the air that is not quite heat, but is related to it. She went back to get her coat. Colin was still in the back room. "All good?" he asked. "Yes," she said. She put her coat on. She took her bag from the shelf where she always kept it during shifts. She said goodnight to Patrick, the cook, who was cleaning the flat-top grill with focused efficiency and who raised one hand briefly in return without looking up. She went out into the street. It was cool and clear outside, the kind of evening that follows a warm afternoon, when the air has dropped 10 degrees but not yet cold enough to need more than a coat. She stood on the pavement for a moment and let it settle over her. She had a bus to catch. She had groceries she had been meaning to buy for 2 days. She had a phone call she had been putting off. To a cousin. Nothing urgent, just long overdue. She had a book on her nightstand that she had been reading in small pieces for 3 weeks, and she had been looking forward to reading another piece of it tonight. All of this was still true. The evening had its plan, and the plan was still there. She started walking. Her pocket was not heavy. Paper is light. A photograph and a folded note from a woman she did not know, and would very likely never see again. A woman whose grandmother had grown up on the same street as her own grandmother, the same specific rectangle of a city, the same buildings and that particular winter light. She had thought about what Vera had said as she was leaving. She had thought about the word used for finding home in a foreign place. She had not said anything back in that moment, because there had not been a right thing to say, but she had thought about it since. She thought about it now. There is a specific loneliness to living fluently in a world that does not know your other language. Not a painful loneliness, not always, sometimes just a quiet one. The loneliness of carrying something very particular that most people around you cannot read. She had carried her Russian like that for 8 years in this city, brought it out when she called her family on Sundays, when she dreamed sometimes, when she counted things in her head because Russian numbers still moved faster in her mind than English ones. And tonight it had been there in a restaurant at 7 in the evening on a Tuesday, recognized by a woman in a gray coat with perfect posture and folded hands, and she had sat down at the table and spoken it out loud at normal volume, and it had not made her more foreign. It had made her, for a little while, a specific person rather than a general one, herself rather than a silhouette. She reached the bus stop. The bus was 3 minutes away according to the display. She reached into her pocket. She took out the photograph. She looked at it under the lamp of the bus stop, the street in winter, the orange angled light on the snow, the buildings on both sides of the frame. She turned it over. She read the back again, what Vera had written. One sentence. The address of the bakery that had been there since before Vera was born, which Vera had mentioned during the conversation, the one on the corner, the one that was still there as far as she knew. Below it, in different handwriting, in case you ever go back. The bus arrived. She got on. She found a seat near the back and sat with the photograph face down on her knee. She looked out the window as the bus moved through the city, the lights of the streets coming and going, shops that were still open, their windows yellow, a woman walking a dog, 2 teenagers on bicycles. She thought about the bakery. She thought about whether it was still there. She thought about what it would be like to walk to it, if she went back someday, if she stood on that corner and looked at the building, and tried to feel what her grandmother had felt standing in the same spot 40 years earlier. Whether she would feel it or whether it would just be a building, she thought she might feel it. She thought she would go, someday. She was not sure when, but someday. The bus moved through the city. The city moved around her. It was her city. She had been building it as her own for 8 years, street by street, bus route by bus route, the slow and specific work of making a place familiar by living in it until it became the background of your life. She had another city that had been that once. She did not live there anymore. She carried it in her pocket and she moved through the one around her, and she was, at this particular moment, on a Tuesday night bus home from a shift that had not gone the way she planned, exactly herself. The note stayed folded in her pocket. She did not take it out again on the bus. She would read it again later, at home, in her kitchen, at the small table where she ate and read and made her calls to family on Sundays. She would read it in the light of the lamp above the table, which was good reading light, which she had specifically chosen the lamp for when she moved in 3 years ago. She would read it, and she would not show it to anyone, not because it was a secret, not because it was too private, but because some things belong entirely to the person who received them, and that belonging is not diminished by being shared, but it is not completed by sharing either. Some things are whole already, complete, closed in the good way, the way a hand closes around something it means to keep. The bus turned a corner. The street ahead was lit and empty and straight. She put the photograph back in her pocket. She looked out the window. She went home.